Unknown planets, legendary battles, and incredible stories await you here. But don't forget to be a part of this universe. Subscribe, like, comment, be a part of this great adventure. The void of space stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. Stars burned in distant silence, witnesses to countless wars, yet unmoved by the rise and fall of empires. Within this vast darkness, the Human Council's Grand Armada surged forward, a force so immense it seemed less like a fleet and more like a celestial phenomenon. 10,000 warships, each a fortress of destruction, glided in perfect unison, their hulls gleaming with the cold efficiency of an empire that had never known true defeat. Admiral Alistar Vale stood on the Bridge of Supremacy, the Council's most formidable battleship, a behemoth that dwarfed even the dreadnoughts escorting it. From his vantage point, Vale could see the formations aligning in precise, mathematical harmony, each warship maintaining the calculated distance required for maximum fire coverage. It was a masterpiece of military engineering, the embodiment of an empire that had crushed rebellion after rebellion with impersonal brutality. Victory was certain. The enemy was weak, a scattered collection of radicals who had been on the run for decades. Their defeat was merely a formality, an inevitability delayed by the Council's patience. For years, these so-called rebels had been a nuisance, vanishing into the void, striking supply lines, sabotaging outposts, but never once had they dared to face the Council's full might. Now their time was up. Vale exhaled slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He had served the Council for 3 decades, rising through the ranks not by birthright, but by a ruthless commitment to order. He did not revel in destruction, nor did he shy from it. The universe was chaos, and it was men like him who imposed discipline upon it. This battle would be swift. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A slight flicker in the fleet's long-range scanners. An anomaly. A junior officer frowned at his station, fingers moving over his console. "Admiral, I'm detecting." He paused, recalibrated, tried again. His face tightened. "Sir, something's off. Our long-range sweeps aren't returning expected data." Vale didn't move. "Clarify." I'm not sure, sir. It's not interference, but we're losing telemetry. Ships are dropping off our sensors." That was impossible. The Council's fleet operated with the most sophisticated tracking technology in existence, capable of detecting the faintest energy signatures across light years. For a vessel to simply vanish, it defied all logic. Vale's gaze sharpened. "Run diagnostics. Ensure our systems aren't being jammed." The officer's hands flew over the console. "Already did, sir. There's no external interference. The ships are still there. We just can't see them." A silence settled over the bridge, a creeping unease threading its way into the seasoned officers. Vale felt it too, a disturbance, something intangible pressing against the very fabric of reality. Then, without warning, the Horizon's Wrath, a battleship on the fleet's outer edge, erupted into a sphere of white-hot fire. There had been no impact, no incoming fire, no warning signs. One moment it was there. The next, it was a superheated wreck, breaking apart in slow motion, debris scattering into the void. The Bridge of Supremacy came alive with frantic voices. "Enemy contact! Attempting to localize. Negative, no signatures detected. No projectiles, no energy discharges, it's like." Another explosion. Then another. Ships blinked out of existence, consumed by brilliant, silent detonations. No enemy appeared on scanners, no transmissions came through, no evidence of an external attack could be found. It was as if the fleet had sailed into a storm of invisible death. Vale's pulse remained steady, but he could feel the raw tension in the air. His officers, some of the most disciplined minds in the Council's military, were breaking protocol, speaking over one another in clipped, urgent tones. "Enough!" His voice cut through the chaos. "Switch to full-spectrum scans. Fire in all directions. Blind bombardment." The order rippled through the fleet. Within seconds, the void was alight with plasma fire, kinetic rounds, and high-energy bursts designed to sweep vast areas of space clean of any unseen adversaries. But the enemy was untouched. More ships fell. The perfect formation, crafted with precision over years of warfare, fractured like brittle glass. Vale's mind raced through possibilities. A new stealth technology? Advanced jamming fields? But no, none of that explained the lack of debris, the complete absence of tactical warning. Ships weren't just being destroyed. They were being erased. Then, supremacy trembled. Not from an impact. Not from an external attack. But from something else. Something deeper, something inside. Warning sirens blared as the bridge flickered with emergency lights. Systems fluctuated, engines, shields, even life support, all momentarily destabilized by an unseen force. A presence. Vast. Unknowable. And then in the Admiral's ear, a voice. Measured. Human. You never ruled the stars, Admiral. You only borrowed them. Vale's breath caught for the first time in years. He turned sharply, eyes scanning the bridge, but no one else seemed to hear it. The voice had spoken directly to him, cutting through the noise, reaching into the core of his mind. And then, before he could react, supremacy, the pride of the Council, the largest warship ever constructed, simply ceased to exist. No explosion. No debris. No wreckage drifting into space. Just nothing. A void where a Titan had stood. The rest of the fleet, now leaderless, collapsed into panic. Some ships attempted to flee, but they too were swallowed. Others fired blindly into the black, screaming for reinforcements that would never come. One by one, the Council's mighty warships vanished. The universe, indifferent as always, watched in silence. And in that silence, the shadow moved once more. The void where supremacy had stood remained untouched, an absence more unsettling than destruction. No wreckage drifted, no residual energy flared, just emptiness, as if the flagship had never existed. Across the scattered remnants of the Council's fleet, silence gripped the comm channels. Officers, soldiers, entire crews held their breath, waiting for orders that would never come. The Human Council's greatest armada had been dissected in minutes. The survivors, fewer with each passing second, scrambled for explanations. Yet there were none. Captain Elias Rohn, stationed aboard the warship Valiant, had seen impossible things in battle, but this was something beyond war. His hands clenched the console as he stared at the sensors, which flickered uselessly, trying and failing to register what had happened to supremacy. "Bring up a full-spectrum scan," he ordered, his voice steady despite the creeping horror beneath. "Already running, Captain." His lieutenant, a woman named Lorna Saito, worked furiously at her station. No debris, no energy residue. It's like they weren't hit by anything at all. Rohn ground his teeth. No. Something hit them. Something is here. A new transmission flickered to life on the bridge. Static washed through the speakers before resolving into a voice, calm and deliberate. "This battle is over. Power down your weapons and surrender. There will be no further warnings." The voice was human. No distortion, no artificial modulation, just quiet certainty. It unsettled Rohn more than any alien threat ever could. Saito shot him a look. "Orders, Captain?" He inhaled sharply. Every instinct screamed to fight, to claw back control. But he had commanded fleets before. He had seen what happened to those who refused to recognize a lost battle. "Shut down weapons," he said, his voice tight. "Send the order to the remaining ships." The crew hesitated. Even now, even as the fleet crumbled, there was defiance in their eyes. But defiance without reason was suicide. "Do it," he snapped. One by one, the surviving ships complied. The distant flashes of battle dimmed, leaving only silence in their wake. Rohn exhaled, stepping away from the console. He forced himself to think, to push past the numb disbelief. Who were these people? The rebellion had always been a nuisance, never a true threat. A scattered force of defectors and outlaws, striking from the shadows but never standing their ground. This wasn't the work of a desperate insurgency. It was something greater. Something prepared. The screen flickered. A new signal was coming through. A face appeared, human, male, and utterly unfamiliar. His hair was dark, cut short, his eyes sharp with an intelligence that made Rohn's stomach twist. There was no insignia on his uniform, no markings to identify allegiance. Just the quiet confidence of a man who had already won. "My name is Commander Dane Kether," he said, his voice as steady as the stars. "You are now prisoners of the Shadow Fleet." Prisoners. A slow chill crawled down Roan's spine. This wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. The silence between Captain Elias Roan and Commander Dane Kether stretched, thick with things left unsaid. The restraints around Roan's wrists had disengaged, but he did not move. He was free, yet not. He was still in a room he did not understand, facing a man whose very existence had unraveled the foundation of everything he had believed to be true. He flexed his fingers, feeling the ghost of the energy restraints lingering on his skin, then exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. Kether watched him with quiet patience, his posture unchanged. "You will see for yourself," Kether had said. Roan met his gaze, searching for deception. He found none. Whatever the Shadow Fleet was, whoever they were, they didn't need to lie. They had already won. The door behind Kether slid open with a whisper, revealing a corridor bathed in a soft, unfamiliar light. Roan tensed instinctively, expecting guards, but none appeared. No armed escort. No forceful hands pushing him forward. It unsettled him more than confinement had. Kether gestured toward the open door. "Walk with me." Roan hesitated. He had always been a man of discipline, trained to move with calculated intent, to anticipate an enemy's next move. But this was different. This was a battlefield without weapons. A war waged in knowledge, not firepower. He rose to his feet, his boots making no sound against the floor. He took measured steps forward, following Kether through the doorway, leaving behind the sterile room and stepping into something far more dangerous, the unknown. The corridor stretched ahead, sleek and seamless, the walls infused with a gentle luminescence. It was neither cold nor sterile, but alive, as if the very ship pulsed with a quiet hum beneath his feet. There were no wires, no exposed panels, none of the industrial harshness of Council warships. This was something else entirely. Technology so advanced it seemed effortless. Kether walked beside him, hands at his sides, exuding the same unshakable certainty he had carried in the interrogation room. "You've been trained to believe in absolutes," Kether said as they walked. "Power and weakness. Victory and defeat." The Council built itself on the illusion that strength was enough to control the stars. Roan kept his expression neutral. The Council did control the stars. Until now. Kether inclined his head slightly, as if conceding the point. "Yes. And tell me, Captain, what happens to an empire when its foundation is a lie?" Roan said nothing. They turned a corner, and suddenly, the corridor opened into something vast. Roan stopped. The space before him stretched outward into what could only be described as a command center, but not one he had ever seen before. The walls curved organically, a seamless blend of form and function, displays appearing in the air like ripples in water. A massive viewport spanned the far side of the room, revealing the cold void of space beyond, except it was not empty. The Shadow Fleet. Not a ragtag insurgency, not a fleet cobbled together from stolen warships, but something far greater. It stretched beyond sight, dark forms gliding through the void like living shadows, their surfaces absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Their shapes were unfamiliar, fluid, as if they had not been built, but grown. And there were thousands of them. More than the Council had ever conceived possible. The Council's fleet had been annihilated in minutes. And now, looking at this, Roan finally understood why. The Council had never ruled the stars. They had only occupied them, like squatters in an abandoned house, unaware that the true owners had simply stepped away for a time. Kether watched him carefully. "Now you begin to understand." Roan's voice was low, measured. "I understand that I've been lied to. That the Council's history is incomplete." He turned to face Kether fully. "But what I don't understand is why you waited. If you had this kind of power, you could have erased the Council decades ago." Kether's gaze darkened, the weight of something old settling behind his eyes. "We did not wait by choice." The displays in the room shifted, flickering to life with cascading streams of data. Roan's eyes scanned the information, his military mind instinctively parsing it. Star charts, weapon schematics, and something else, something that made his breath hitch. Timelines. The Council's expansion. A chronological record, stretching back far beyond what the Council had ever publicly acknowledged. The early conquests, the rise of the military state. The systematic purging of civilizations deemed a threat to absolute control. But among them, something new. A name that should not have existed. Solus Initiative. Roan's stomach tightened. What is this? Kether's voice was quiet. The beginning. Roan stepped closer, eyes locked onto the data. The Solus Initiative predated the Council by nearly a century. A classified operation. A mass deployment of military resources toward an unidentified target in deep space. Your ancestors didn't build the Council, Kether said, watching him. They stole it. Roan's blood ran cold. The data was undeniable. The early Council had not risen to power through political maneuvering or careful expansion. They had inherited it, after erasing the ones who came before. Kether gestured to the display. They found us, Captain. They saw what we had built. And instead of coexisting, they wiped our name from history and took our empire for themselves. Roan's pulse pounded in his ears. He had spent his life serving an empire that had not conquered the stars, but inherited them through genocide. He looked back at Kether. And now you're taking it back. Kether didn't smile, but there was something final in his expression. No, Captain. We are restoring balance. A heavy silence settled between them. Roan turned back to the viewport, staring at the impossible fleet beyond. He was standing on a ship that shouldn't exist, speaking to a man whose civilization had been erased from history, realizing that the war he had fought his entire life had never truly been his to fight. And for the first time, he asked himself a question he had never dared to before. What if the Council deserved to fall? Behind him, Kether spoke one last time. Welcome to the truth, Captain. The weight of truth settled over Captain Elias Roan like the silence of deep space. Heavy, endless, inescapable. He stood before the vast viewport, watching the impossible fleet drift like sentinels in the void. His entire life had been spent enforcing the Council's will, crushing insurrections, ensuring order. Now, he understood that order had been built atop a graveyard, and he was standing among the dead who had refused to stay buried. Behind him, Commander Dane Kether observed him with the patience of a man who had seen this reckoning before. Roan wasn't the first to learn the truth. He wouldn't be the last. The Council's history is a fabrication, Roan said finally, his voice quieter than he intended. A stolen empire built on genocide. Kether inclined his head. That is the reality they did everything to conceal. Roan turned from the viewport. And you expect me to what, betray them? Join you? Kether studied him, his expression unreadable. I expect you to think, Captain. Not react. Not follow orders. Just think. That unsettled Roan more than a demand would have. Orders he understood. Orders gave shape to chaos. But this uncertainty, was foreign. A soft chime pulsed through the chamber, and a voice, clear and smooth, came through unseen speakers. Commander, the assembly is ready. Kether nodded slightly before turning back to Roan. It's time you saw the true extent of what's been hidden from you. Roan had no reason to comply. He could resist, fight, force their hand. Yet something deep in his gut, something beyond pride or duty, made him follow as Kether led him out of the command center and into the corridors beyond. The ship was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Council vessels were rigid, efficient, designed for intimidation as much as function. The Shadow Fleet's flagship, however, felt alive. The walls pulsed with an ambient energy, the pathways shifting seamlessly as if the ship itself responded to its occupants. The design was neither organic nor mechanical, but something in between. It was old. Older than the Council. Older than human memory. The passage opened into a grand hall, lined with figures standing in solemn rows. Roan's military instincts assessed them instantly. They weren't a standard force. They carried no visible weapons, wore no identical uniforms. And yet, there was no mistaking their discipline. These were soldiers. Survivors. At the far end of the chamber, raised on a platform, stood a woman. Her presence commanded the room, though she made no effort to impose it. She was older than Kether, her face lined not with age but with experience. Her hair was silver, cut close to her head, her stance measured and powerful. Kether led Roan forward. Captain, this is High Strategist Saria Varen. Varen's gaze locked onto him, cool and assessing. You are the highest-ranking survivor of the Council's fleet. Roan squared his shoulders. That remains to be seen. Her lips twitched slightly. Defiant. Expected. She studied him for a beat longer, then gestured toward the assembled soldiers. These are the last remnants of our people, Captain. Those who survived your council's purge. Those who endured long enough to reclaim what was stolen. Roan glanced at them. There was no hatred in their faces, no thirst for vengeance. Only purpose. That, more than anything, disturbed him. He had spent his life fighting rebels who burned with fury, who sought revenge. But these people, they were something else entirely. This isn't an insurgency, he said slowly. It's a resurrection. Varen inclined her head. You understand faster than most. Roan exhaled sharply. And what exactly do you want from me? Perspective, she said. You are a man who has seen the workings of the Council from the inside. You know how they think, how they move. You understand the machinery of their war. You want my knowledge. We want the truth to be seen by more than just those who have already suffered beneath the Council's rule. She stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. Tell me, Captain, when you learned what we were, what your own people did to us, did it change you? Roan clenched his jaw. It made me question things. And do you think the soldiers you commanded, the ones who still fight for the Council, would question it too? He wanted to say no, that they were loyal, that they were beyond persuasion, that they believed in the cause. But hadn't he believed too? Hadn't he once stood where they stood, certain of his righteousness? Varen watched the struggle play out on his face and nodded, as if she had seen this countless times before. Your fleet is gone. Your leadership is gone. The Council will tell its people a lie to explain their failure, unless we show them the truth first. Roan stared at her. You want me to do that? You are proof, Captain, not a faceless enemy. A soldier of the Council who has seen the truth with his own eyes. Roan let out a breath, running a hand over his face. And if I refuse? Kether, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Then we leave you to your fate. Roan frowned. Meaning? Varen met his gaze. We are not executioners. If you wish to return to what remains of the Council, we will not stop you. But understand this, if you return as their soldier, you will find yourself fighting on the wrong side of history once again. The choice hung between them, heavy, inevitable. Roan had lived his life by absolutes, right and wrong, order and chaos, loyalty and betrayal. Now, he was faced with a war that was neither rebellion nor conquest. A war that had already been decided, long before he was ever born. The Council had stolen the stars, and the rightful heirs had come to take them back. Roan closed his eyes for a brief moment, then exhaled sharply. When he opened them, his decision was made. Captain Elias Roan had always believed war was simple. Orders were given, and soldiers obeyed. Enemies were named, and they were destroyed. There was no room for doubt, no space for hesitation. The Council had built an empire on that certainty, and he had been one of its enforcers. Now, standing aboard a ship that should not exist, staring at the remnants of a civilization the Council had buried, he realized war had never been simple at all. It had only been a matter of who controlled the truth. High strategist Saria Varen and Commander Dane Kether watched him in silence, their presence steady but unyielding. They had not threatened him. They had not demanded his loyalty. They had done something far worse. They had made him think. Roan exhaled slowly, his hands curling into fists at his sides. If he accepted what they had shown him, if he lent his voice to their cause, he would be turning his back on everything he had built. Every mission, every order, every belief, abandoned. And yet, if he returned to the Council, what would he be returning to? A crumbling empire, scrambling to justify its own survival? A government built on stolen history and silenced truths? He met Varen's gaze. If I do this, if I stand before the Council's people and expose what you've told me, what happens next? Varen studied him for a long moment before answering. They will react as all dying regimes do. With desperation. With violence. She stepped forward, her voice calm but unshakable. But the difference, Captain, is that this time, They will not be fighting a rebellion. They will be fighting the weight of their own lies. Roan set his jaw. And you think the people will listen? They will not need to listen, Kether said. They will see. Roan frowned. How? Kether turned toward the viewport and made a small motion with his hand. The image beyond shifted, the vast expanse of space giving way to something new. At first, it was nothing but shadow, deep black against the void. Then, light caught on its edges, revealing a structure so vast it seemed to stretch endlessly. Not a station. A city. It loomed in the darkness, an intricate lattice of metal and energy, its framework ancient but pulsing with life. Ships glided through its docking bays, their designs unlike anything the Council had ever created. Towering spires rose at its core, their surfaces crackling with raw power. Roan felt his breath hitch. You're looking at the first home humanity ever built beyond Earth, Kether said. A home the Council erased from history. Roan's mind reeled. Every document, every map, every recorded expansion of human civilization had started with the Council's rise. There had been no settlements before them, no spacefaring civilizations unaccounted for. The Council had built the first colonies, the first fleets. That was what they had always taught. And yet, here it was. Real. Alive. This was supposed to be gone, he murmured almost to himself. Varen's gaze remained steady. Because the Council made sure you believed that. The weight of it pressed against him, suffocating. If this was true, if the Council had not only stolen power but had rewritten history to hide what came before, then everything he had fought for had been built on a foundation of lies. You said they'll react with violence, Roan said, forcing his thoughts into order. How long do we have before they strike? Kether's expression darkened. They already have. The display flickered again, shifting its focus to a sector of space near the station's outer perimeter. Roan's pulse quickened. Wreckage drifted in the void, the remains of ships torn apart in battle. They sent a reconnaissance fleet, Varen said. They found us. We destroyed them before they could escape, but we know what comes next. Roan's mind ran through the Council's response protocol. A missing fleet would trigger suspicion, but it wouldn't be enough for full mobilization. No, they would wait. Reassess. And when they confirmed the threat, they would send everything they had left. They'll frame this as an attack, he said. A hostile force threatening humanity itself. Varen inclined her head. Yes. And when they come, they won't come to investigate. They'll come to eradicate. Kether's gaze hardened. Which is why we need to act first. Roan exhaled sharply, turning away from the viewport. His thoughts churned, but the answer was already forming in his mind. The Council had spent centuries controlling the narrative, deciding what people knew, what they feared. If the Shadow Fleet waited for them to strike, the truth would never reach the people. They have to see it for themselves, he said. Kether nodded. And you, Captain, will be the one to force them to look. Roan looked between them. You want me to be the messenger. You are the highest-ranking survivor of the Council's fleet, Varen said. Your name carries weight. You are proof. If the people hear it from you, they will question what they've been told. Roan clenched his fists, his mind flashing back to the men and women he had fought beside. Soldiers who still believed. Soldiers who would fight and die for the Council, never knowing the truth. They'll call me a traitor. Kether's expression didn't change. They will call you many things. Roan breathed deeply. He had spent his life enforcing the Council's laws, defending its dominion. But now he saw the truth of it. The Council had not built an empire. It had stolen one. He thought of the officers who had stood beside him, the men who had fought at his command, the ones who would be sent to their deaths fighting for something that had never truly been theirs. He thought of the people in the colonies, the ones who had never known a world outside the Council's rule, the ones who had been denied the right to even question the past. He thought of the ships drifting in the void, the city standing in defiance of history itself. Then he thought of himself, and he made his choice. Roan exhaled, his pulse steadying. Then we don't have time to waste. For the first time, Varen's expression softened, though only slightly. No, we do not. Roan squared his shoulders, the weight in his chest no lighter, but his path clearer than it had ever been. He had spent his life fighting wars that meant nothing. Now, for the first time, he was stepping into one that did. The transmission had been sent. The truth, no longer buried in forgotten archives or concealed beneath the Council's lies, now rippled across the stars. Every colony, every station, every world under the Council's dominion had received the same message. A voice they had once called their own, speaking against the empire that had shaped them. Captain Elias Rohn had spoken. He had stood before the Council's people, his face broadcast across secured channels, his voice steady, unyielding. He had shown them the lost city, the station that had existed before the Council's rule. He had revealed the wreckage of the Council's own fleet, proof of a war the Empire had never admitted to fighting. And he had told them the truth, that the Empire they swore allegiance to was not the first, that the Council had not built civilization, it had stolen it. The response had been immediate. The Council had branded him a traitor. His name had been stripped from records, his service erased. Across the core worlds, the propaganda machine roared to life, labeling the Shadow Fleet a rogue force, a threat to order. But it was too late. The message had already spread. And now the Council was coming. On the bridge of the Shadow Fleet's flagship, Rohn stood alongside High Strategist Varen and Commander Kether, watching the incoming warships appear on the tactical display. The Council's retaliation had arrived. Thousands of ships. Rohn had fought in wars before. He had commanded fleets, led invasions, enacted the Council's will without hesitation. He had seen destruction on scales few could comprehend. But he had never seen a fleet move like this. Not with precision. Not with discipline. With fear. They're deploying dreadnoughts ahead of their main force, Kether said, analyzing the patterns. They want to break us before they fully engage. Rohn nodded. They won't waste time with negotiations. They need a swift victory before doubt spreads through their ranks. He turned to Varen. Are our forces in position? They have been waiting for this longer than you can imagine, she said. Rohn exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He was no longer fighting for the Council. He was fighting against it. And not just for the Shadow Fleet, but for the soldiers still trapped within the Council's ranks. Men and women who had been told they were fighting for the future, never realizing they had been fighting to protect a stolen past. The first strike came as expected. The dreadnoughts unleashed waves of plasma fire, meant to shatter defenses and cripple morale. But the Shadow Fleet had not survived for centuries by fighting conventionally. They did not meet the attack head-on. Instead, they vanished. One by one, the Shadow Fleet ships faded from enemy sensors, their forms dissolving into the void. Not cloaking. Not stealth. Something more. Something the Council had spent centuries trying to erase. Rohn watched from the display as confusion rippled through the enemy fleet. Command channels overlapped in chaos, officers scrambling for visual confirmation of targets that no longer existed. Then, the counterstrike came. Not in a barrage of firepower, not in an overwhelming display of force. In precision. Shadow Fleet ships reappeared within the gaps of the Council's formation, striking at weak points with flawless coordination. The dreadnoughts, built for brute strength, found themselves surrounded, their weaponry too slow to adjust. One by one, they fell, torn apart before the Council's main force could even react. Panic set in. Rohn could see it unfolding, the hesitation in their formations, the fractured movements of commanders trying to regain control. The Council had never faced an enemy it couldn't see, couldn't predict. They had always relied on overwhelming power. But power meant nothing against an enemy that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war in the shadows. A communication request appeared on the main display. The Council's Admiral. Rohn turned to Varen. She inclined her head slightly. This was his fight. His war. He accepted the transmission. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar. Admiral Garan Kess, one of the Council's most decorated officers. The man who had once been Rohn's superior. Kess's expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something between fury and disbelief. Captain Rohn. Rohn kept his voice level. Admiral. You should be dead. Many things should have been, Rohn said. But here we are. Kess exhaled through his nose. You have no idea what you've done. I think I do, Rohn said. The question is, do you? Kess's gaze flickered. Just for a second. Oh. That was all Rohn needed to see. This war doesn't have to end like this, Kess said, his voice quieter now. You know what the Council is capable of. You know what they will do. Roan did know. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care. They can't fight the truth, Admiral, he said. No matter how many ships they bring, no matter how many words they twist, they can't fight the truth. Silence stretched between them. Then, Kes did something Roan had not expected. He ended the transmission. The Council fleet wavered. And then it shattered. Some ships fled. Some held their ground, only to fall seconds later. Others hesitated, their crews caught between orders and the growing realization that they had been fighting for an empire built on deception. And in that hesitation, the battle ended. Roan stepped back from the console, watching the remnants of the Council's forces scatter into the void. This wasn't just a military defeat. This was the breaking of an illusion. He turned to Varen. She met his gaze with something that almost resembled pride. It's over, he said. For them, she corrected. For us, it is only beginning. She was right. The Council had fallen, but its shadow remained. There would still be battles to fight, minds to free, truths to rebuild from the ruins of lies. But for the first time, the stars were no longer ruled by deception. For the first time, they belonged to those who had never stopped searching for the truth. And Roan, a man who had once been their enemy, had helped deliver it. He looked out at the vast, open void, and for the first time in his life, he felt free.